And joining us now at WEDF is Marc Sidwell, from the London-based International Policy Network. Thanks for your time today, Marc. One of your most controversial points recently you've made is in basically saying that fair trade is not fair. What's your main gripe against fair trade?
Well, I think one of the things that worries me most about fair trade and ethical trade in general is that it shouldn't distract us from the bigger picture of development. And this was something that we were just talking about in the session, which is that in the end what's going to solve the problems of poverty is capitalism and free trade in the world. The Doha round, obviously, hopefully that's going to be completed. That's going to put 287 billion into the world economy, half of that directly into poor countries. But even without that, people can get involved unilaterally. Developing countries, they can improve their governance and their trade facilitation. The World Bank estimates another 377 billion coming in through that. Now, fair trade initiatives, ethical trading schemes, they're a very small part of the economy. Now, that does not say that there's not a place for them, but we need to accept the fact that that's maybe a 5% to perhaps 20% at most share of the market with a consumer conscience who are interested in those products, and we can't expect them to make all the difference. So they may have a role. We shouldn't let them distract us from where we really need to be concentrating, to be fair to everyone, to improve trade for all and to reduce poverty.
Yes, we've been hearing those figures that it is still a very small part of the market, but a very hugely growing part as well. We're seeing figures about 1,000% growth in some sectors of support for fair trade by consumers. So clearly there is a demand out there. Do you not see it as something that is an increasing demand?
Well, it's undoubtedly it's been an increasing demand. The growth has been extraordinary, although of course as you'd agree, from a very small base. So the rate of growth isn't as important as the actual size. And there are two issues there. One of them, of course, is we're in the middle of an enormous financial crisis, and everyone's been talking about what that means, and the entire market, not just the ethical market, is going to contract. So as a part of that, it seems very likely that growth is going to at least slow, and it may contract anyway. It's going to eventually run into some sort of natural barrier, because there does seem to be this limit to the amount of the market that's concerned with consumer conscience. And there's also a worry that the more of the market you take, the more you may distort the market, and that may cause real problems. There's an economist in the UK, Peter Griffiths, who's been looking at this, and he's really worried about what's going to happen with coffee. He thinks that by subsidising, putting in price floors, it's going to get to a point where the entire market may collapse because of slow growing cycles. It takes a while for this to come through, and by subsidising 1.5 million farmers, you may end up putting 25 million into absolute penury. And those problems, they may not be such a problem while the market is small, but as fair trade and ethical schemes grow, those distortions grow as well, and so that's a real worry with the growth.
You have a lot of confidence in capitalism and free market forces rectifying and being the better way for these traders to enter marketplaces. But in the past, free trade, you would agree, has really done very little for developing nations.
Well, I think that's a hard thing to say. We've reduced poverty in the last 50 years worldwide more than in the last 500. In the last year, more people were brought out of poverty than ever before in human history. In India and in China, we're seeing what free markets can do to raise people out of poverty in absolutely unbelievable numbers. In Africa as well, Africa is the best economic news story going at the moment. The IMF says it's grown 6% every year for the last 4 years in sub-Saharan Africa. On Tuesday in London, just before I left, there was a very important, very interesting group of investment importers looking for inward investment into Africa and saying, actually, we used to think of this as a place where we didn't want to invest because of governance problems. Now it's very tempting. We're looking at the growth that we've seen. You could see poverty halving on that basis by 2015 in Africa. Governance is improving enormously. There's just a piece about this in Time. Mo Ibrahim, through Celtel, which is one of the great success stories of capitalism, is mobile phones in Africa and elsewhere in the developing world. And he's just sponsored a prize for governance in Africa and trying to improve that. So I think there's enormous good news stories from capitalism.
So in terms of the other delegates and speakers here at the conference, what's your main message to them? What are the factors that you would like them to consider in their economic and trade debates?
Well, I think it's just important. I'm not saying anything against ethical trade initiatives as such, but we have to start with the ideal of capitalism and free trade and the good that that's doing, and then we can supplement on top perhaps with ethical schemes that are directed and trying to do certain things. And there, one of the things that's been a real talking point at this conference is the need to get up the value chain, and in order to make a real difference to poverty, not just improving conditions for producers and keeping them in a somewhat peasant-like relationship, but groups like Equitrade, like Café Brit in Costa Rica are pathfinders there, and I think that's tremendously exciting. The possibility to really bring greater economic benefits to people in developing countries by moving up the value chain, so you're refining, not just selling a basic raw commodity.
Marc Sidwell, thanks very much for your time.